It's an honor to actually welcome Mr. Daniel Den Hollander. He was here last month and he is here to conclude his talk on the challenges and the complexities that South African men are faced with post-apartheid. Thank you very much for sowing into this movement. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Daniel Den Hollander, please.
I'm just gonna have to make sure. Can everybody hear me? That one for here. The online can hear me at least, and the rest of you. Okay, we're gonna have to see how we do this. Maybe I must. This is interview with Rassie van der Dussen. We had to sit almost like a giraffe just to be able to speak into the microphone, and I get a taste of it. Thank you for the opportunity. I think this is a bit of a different flavor to the presentations that you've had up until now. I'm quite interested about how we in society, even though we're in a post-apartheid South Africa, we're still very much dealing with the same wounds, the same difficulties. And as a psychologist, that's my trade, you know, we have the absolute luxury of not only sitting and listening to people, but actually taking time and struggling with people. Currently, I'm really being looked after by the community in Athlone and Lansdowne. I think I've now become an honorary member. I think I've now become adopted. And on that note, I just want to wish those brothers and sisters of that community a very happy Ashura today, where we're celebrating the parting of the Red Sea. So just that little bit as well. But I'm going to talk a bit about today about something. Ooh, I see we've got WhatsApp instead of. Love it. Something that I was picking up just after lockdown. So a lot of my slides and presentations are very much informed by the clients that share their lives with me, with their permission, of course. And often what happens with us is that we start to see trends that happen within our sessions, within individual clients. But if you see a lot of them, then it starts to talk a little bit to a bigger, how would you say it, a bigger scope, a bigger audience. And this was something that really came out from there. So we're going to start. Are we ready? Say it again. You can just start the slideshow. Yeah, perfect. Can everybody? Okay, perfect. So this happened sort of August 2020. It was about a year, or let's say 7 months into lockdown. And I was getting a high flux of middle managers coming into the practice for symptoms consistent with burnout and a depressed mood or depressive episode. That means that's not necessarily meaning that people are sad. It's actually the opposite. It's that you're completely and utterly blunt and completely suppressed in regards to all types of emotions, completely out of touch. Okay. And all the, you know how psychologists are, the first thing we ask is, so tell me about your parents, and then also, is there any traumas? And ironically, no, happy family set, or relatively happy family setups in South Africa. We do have difficulties in regards with families, as we spoke about in the previous presentation. But also the family support that they had was there. In fact, they were also part of being burdened. And so it didn't really come from the areas that I would have guessed would be the areas that would start that kind of presentation. And there was a strong identity component to the presenting problem. And two things we were picking up, something called learned helplessness. And just to explain what learned helplessness is the idea of I can't. So anything that comes onto me is just something that I immediately want to give to somebody else to do because I'm unable to. But when we investigate, you are able to. You don't have a disability as such. It's much more on an inability to be able to take anything on, but there's no physical reason as to why. And from a psychological, it's a bit tricky. So what's going on? And it's got a lot to do with if I delegate it off to somebody else, then I don't need to take charge of it anymore. So it's more of an abdicating of the responsibility, if that makes sense. And then disempoweredness and defeated. And there was another thing that all these people had in common, and that was that they were middle managers or public sector employees. I'm just checking if we have any public sector employees in the building. Because this is the conversation we don't like to have, but this is exactly the conversation that we need to have. I almost want to call this next 3 words the motto of public servants. Whenever you see public servants, and we can test the room here to see if you say the same. They will say, if you ask, how are you? They say, no use complaining. What's the use, right? No, thank you. Okay, so this is the part. Okay, unfortunately, I had a bit of a situation this week where my laptops have gone completely missing. I'm hoping it's not thefts and they will come up, but want to really thank Natalie for making sure that they're all there. But these slides are as interesting for me as they are for you. I hope everything works. So press play. You can go to the next slide. So what am I seeing? I'm seeing a patterned response that specifically aims to middle managers. What is a middle manager? Anybody who has people working underneath them, but also has to report to a higher structure. So that's probably everybody in this room who's not having their own private practice. And my question was, is this possibly a response to the dynamic consistent within that working role of the middle manager? And these slides started off with reading an interesting article on LinkedIn, but totally culminated into lots of hours of struggling with clients around these slides. So this has really been the culmination of I would say about probably 40 or 50 different clients looking through this, struggling it with me, and this is what we came up with. You can go to the next slide. So, okay, this is going to be tricky. Okay, so that over there is a diagram that I want you to start getting used to. So the top part, the blue part, is how your employer treats you. And the green part is how... Let's see how we can make this more tricky. Okay, now we're with Eskom. We're going to pretend that we're not going to be paranoid at this point in time. Okay, how are we going to do this? Just carry on. You've all got the slides with you. Is it just going to kick into gear again? Okay, perfect. Okay, so what happened was, okay, you all got the slides here, and I need to introduce the slides to you, and I don't have the slides, but they'll come as it goes along. But if you look in the diagram, so the blue, we all have it as black and white, but the blue part is how your employer sees you. The bottom part is how your employees respond to you, and you are that red pressure point situation. Does that make sense? Okay, so from the top, we feel a pressure because the expectations of our employers are fortified through the policies and the core standard documents that they send to you. I used to work for the Department of Health, and those core standards felt more important than the ethical code from HPCSA. It worried the hell out of me because I was being told how to do my craft by people who don't understand how to do my craft. And especially in psychology, we have an old saying that says that trying to govern psychologists is like herding cats. So, but that was exactly what was taking place. And these core standards actually didn't talk to the services that I was doing, and yet I had to follow them to the T. Then at the bottom, the people that I'm responsible for, their expectations are fortified through morale and productivity. If I don't make them happy, then their morale goes down, then they're not productive, which now becomes my problem, right? And often the problem is that they're actually not happy with each other, but they don't want to talk to each other, or they're not allowed to talk to each other. It's much easier to put somebody in that place, and that's where the middle manager is, and that's where the pressure point is. That all makes sense, right? Okay. Oh, I really need my slides now, but it's okay. So middle managers, are they gonna come back on? Okay. So here was an interesting thing, an interesting quote. Middle managers have a complicated relationship with power because power is activated and experienced in the context of interpersonal relationships. When interacting with our superiors, we immediately take on a more differential, low-power behavioral style. You know, I'm sure you've all experienced that when you talk to your CEO or your manager, you become a lot more, what's the word, polite. When interacting with subordinates, on the other hand, we adopt a more assertive, high-power behavioral style, where we're much more assertive, we're much more boundaries, and we say things in a much more particular way, right? The difficulty comes in is that often in meetings, we have to do both at the same time. And that's got a lot to do with the fact that often we are told that when we go into meetings or whatever the case might be, that everything just seems to be a bit squashed through. And so we find ourselves almost in this very sort of psychotic, schizoid position. Next slide. Where this all becomes uber confusing. And failure to conform to these role-based expectations can lead to social conflicts and confusion. And that's often what does take place within our meetings as well, is where we have to take charge of something, we get nullified just beforehand, lose all our power, and then what? And then that becomes a big issue, and then we try and reclaim it with a little bit more assertiveness, and then we are having a disciplinary hearing. So these things become very tricky. Next slide. So how do the others relate with us? Well, from the top, often the interactions are top-down.
Go ahead.
Often we are communicated through this sort of absurdity of scores and ratings. I'm sure you know, all familiar with it. If they're upset with us, they usually communicate through disciplinary hearings. Top down, meaning that you're not there engaging equal to equal. Often low support with explanations, which you have to understand. There's no budget. How often do we hear that? But then there is budget to tile the car park, but we have to understand that's because it comes out of a different account, and then also often very forgiving, but with consequences. So if we are unable to do the core standards, they forgive us, but there's consequences to it. They understand we don't have enough people in this section to be able to do the job, but we do have to rate your department now 2 out of 5, and this might impact your ability to get how much is it now? 3%, 2%, 7%, whatever the increase is. At the bottom, we're sitting with people who are overwhelmed and desperate, threatening union action if we don't abide to the needs. I can see. Okay, needs to be convinced, and you sit there with your employee, with the people underneath you, trying to convince them, giving pep talks from another lands, but end up with poor morale, and poor morale equals poor productivity. And if you have poor productivity, it's not the fact of the system, it's your fault. And so you sit here, and these guys over here just want money if they're in private, or just want recognition for ambitious reasons. Let's call a spade a spade. At the bottom here, we're dealing with ethics. Sometimes somebody is a little less productive because they've got to take their kid to the doctor, and you've got to be that person, because these guys are not going to be it, who says, yeah, but it's now the 3rd time your kid is sick. And it's very inhumane, the positions that we find ourselves in, and we often find ourselves squashed between efficacy and ethics, because these guys want you to talk to these guys, and these guys want to talk to you about these guys. So you completely squash between these two conversations. Okay, let's see if this works. Yeah, so these are the managers who are left to explain to the staff about budget limits, regulatory mandates, consumer satisfaction, and yet in those circumstances that they cater to both ends, this is the important line, their own working conditions are neglected. And there's a whole bunch of movies like Office Space, I think was one of them, that make a lot of fun about this weird dynamic that we find ourselves in. In South Africa, we just embraced it. I mean, of all the things that we had to continue using that was still there from the old regime, why was it bureaucracy? For goodness sake. It's so un-African, if I may say so. And then comes this graph. Now you see where the psychologist comes in, is that for me, this is the humanity graph. This is where this ends us up. And remember, if we in these systems, we spend an exorbitant amount of time in these systems because we're there from 7:30, then we're allowed, 15 minutes for a cup of coffee, then we've got to be working. Then we're allowed half an hour break, but that cuts into the hour break at lunch. We spend a hell of a lot of time on this. 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. It's going to have its impact that if this is the kind of humanity that we're working into, this becomes the kind of humanity we take home with us and becomes the type of humanity that we're held back by. And that's the key thing that I really want to talk about in all of us. So the humanity graph, we see our superiors as detached. They don't understand what it is that we're actually doing, constantly justifying their decisions. Irrationality, rationalized. You must be able to produce X amount of work without the staff. How? Guys, there's no budget. We've got to make a plan for the people of Africa, you know? Decisions that they make without consultation. Ambiguous instructions that don't mean anything. I've experienced that a lot with DOH, where the CEO would tell us instructions, and I'm like, how? And they said, well, you know, it's not my scope of practice. Fostering favoritism. You see, this is one of the things, and this is the difference between public sector and government, or if you like, private sectors and public sector, is that private sector, you've at least got one thing working for you, is that if all else fails, the profit line of your business is the thing that's going to rescue you as employees. Because if your productivity is not high, the profit line will always supersede your manager's ideas. So if you're going to work in an inhumane way with inhumane conditions and your employees get disgruntled, your profit line is going to suffer and someone's going to kick in. But in public sectors, there is no profit line. You argue budgets towards treasury. And as a result of that, that one thing, the productivity and the morale, whether or not you are doing a good enough service or not, doesn't make an impact on the business's health. So in other words, efficacy, which is about money, economics, is not the driving force in public sector. And the important thing is then what is? And that's got to do with how that system actually, if we start to critically engage with it, we know that those positions are filled, I'm waiting for someone to say it, by who you know, okay? Now, if we start talking about who you know, then we're talking about popularity and charisma. And if we're talking about popularity and charisma, then the idea of success is about how well you can sell yourself as a political game. You get what I'm saying? And that is a very important notion to put through, because that's where the favoritism comes in, because it's about charisma, and charisma can what's called hide the cracks of a non-efficient system. And so then economics and efficiency goes out the window. Ooh. And then the last bit as well is they always talk from a very idealized perspective, as if we have everything in place. So those cores and standards documents that you are told to do are all about the ideal. But then there's also this other trick that takes place where if you say, well, listen, we actually need like maybe twice as many psychologists in the hospital, then they start saying, No, but you're talking from a very idealized perspective. You know, we're still living in South Africa. And then from the bottom, we've got individuals who are often jealous of us. We're in a middle manager system. Why should we be? Why were they not? Untrusting. Do they really have our intentions at hand? Often they're angry and disgruntled, especially if we've refused to leave. There's always this threat of mutiny. You know, we're not going to talk to you, or the silent treatment that comes in. Then it is the fact that a lot of the working conditions are difficult. So then we sit with employees that are stressed out, and we get absenteeism. And also some of it is active. We find out we have to go in for trade union hearings, or it's passive, which is our fault again, because why are the employees not doing what they're supposed to do? And so we find ourselves between being the enforcers. This over here wants to enforce this towards realizing that these are human beings, and there's empathy coming back towards them. You can see what this does to you as the middle manager sitting in the middle of it. By virtue, they are simultaneously the victims and the carriers of change within an organization, receiving strategy prescriptions from their bosses above and having to implement those strategies with the people who work beneath them. Okay, I think there's another one, but I'm not going to go there. Okay. Oh, yeah, no, there is one thing I want to. Just this. So a study in Colombia found middle managers to be the most stressed in the chain of command and twice as likely to experiencing anxiety than the workers or the owners. Isn't that interesting? There's now research evidence to prove that if you're a middle manager, you've got it worse. So take a deep sigh of relief. You can win your arguments now. You're in the worst position. And it doesn't make sense, does it? Because you would think from economics, the people below you earning less than you have more money, so you should be better. No, this is going to cause you anxiety. And it's not one of those things of, hey, you know, just like suck it up. You know, this is now, you're a manager now you must, we know that the evidence says. So why is this happening? And this is a thing that's, for me, it's about the chains within the system. And for me, chains in the work that I'm doing is stuff that came from previous regimes. And from previous regimes, I'm talking about the legacy of colonialism. I'm talking about the legacy of apartheid, where the way in which people were controlled was more in regards to the structures and the legislation and the bureaucracy, as much as it was physical trauma. And that to some extent, you know, it's debatable about TRC, but although we sometimes are dealing with the interpersonal violence, we never really talk about the structural violence. And it's the structural violence that actually holds us still very much chained up, and is stopping us from progressing into a society that's both empowering and diverse. So we are disempowered when we forget that we are not married to our job. One of the weirdest things that I pick up in my practice is that when people talk about unemployment, it's as if they're talking about life and death. And it's weird because losing your job is nothing like having your life threatened. And yet for a lot of people, it feels as if that's exactly it. We are not owned by our jobs. They can't just get away threatening our jobs. Now, the next line I've got to explain. We are merely chickens who lay eggs for the workplace to become productive. We are not pigs whose existence depends on sacrifice to its owner. Now, that came from a previous CEO that I worked with who stood up and said, I don't want chickens in this hospital. I want pigs. I want people who are willing to sacrifice their careers in order to bring brilliant healthcare towards the whole system. And we all went, man. And the problem is, it's BS. It's rubbish. That's not how it works. We are not pigs. And I think there's a lovely animal farm element to that as well. Our existence does not depend on our sacrifice to the owners, but we are stuck and justify our sacrifice to our professions when we allow ourselves to become stuck by the chains in the system. So I'm going to show you 3 chains of the system that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and then tell you why they're lies, and then how to ramify yourself from it. And then I'm going to run away quickly before anybody that's in senior management is going to have a problem with me. Should we do it? Okay. So the first fallacy is this idea of the career progression. You come across this when they offer you that job description. And in that job description, you've got that one section that leads you right from, I remember, from a young psychologist all the way to the CEO of the hospital. I think it even went further up. I think we were allowed to be even the minister of the Department of Health. And there was that career progression for us. And it looked beautiful and exciting, and it's BS. Because a career, and it's BS for 2 reasons. The first one is a career path is not the path to liberation. And somehow the older generation really believed it to be. Remember, one of the chains of the mind that happens often in Cape Town is an old saying that goes, always the foreman, never the owner. I don't know if you know what I mean when I say that. But it means that when you go home to your family and you say to them, I just got this government job, I've got a cushy public sector job, I'm a manager, all the champagne bottles come out, and there's a big celebration, big meal. But the moment you say to your family, hey, listen, I'm about to start my own business, I've got a place in place, all of a sudden, all the aunties and all the uncles are getting very anxious, asking you questions. Have you really thought about this? You know, but if you go and take that job like so-and-so did, you're going to have your pension and all your benefits and so forth. You know what I'm talking about? Because we're conditioned into thinking that type of way. And the biggest problem is because promotion is a funneled system. So the easiest way to prove that, can I get a piece of paper? I can just reply. Yeah. Okay, so how many CEOs are there generally in a hospital? There's just one, right? And how many, let's talk from a nursing system, there would be probably about, let's say, 30 or 40. So if I have to find a shape that best represents a organogram, it would look something like this. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if I look from the one, I can see everybody, right? But if I turn it around like this, I can only see one person at a time. You see, what I'm trying to demonstrate there is it's only a career progression for one person, not for everybody. Only one person can go all the way to the top. And this idea of us being able to push through the ranks from the bottom to the top requires so many outside factors to fall into place, people to resign or move on to another job, people to get promoted. So once you've got a middle manager that stays there longer than 5 years, they've already clogged up the space, which means that for another 10 people, they're not going to get promoted. So this thing is bullshit. You know, it doesn't actually exist. And we kind of work really hard in order for this thing to exist. So we put a lot of emphasis on the fact of a job just became available. We're going to compete with the other people. We also know that most jobs and most systems that work like this, you want diversity of thought. So you don't want to hire people from your own company. You actually want to hire people from other companies or other places because they're going to come up with new ideas. And so as you see, it's not, this itself is not even a true reflection. It's like a whole bunch of these funnels all happening at the same time. So in other words, a career progression is not going to give you the salary that you want, which is an inconvenient truth. And there's another problem as well. And this talks to the African that should be within all of us, is Biko states that liberation takes place in the hands of the individual. If I'm waiting for all of these things to happen, I'm dependent on external factors in order for my life to increase. And that's a problem, because then liberation is not in my hands. And I think, to be very honest with you, on a Black consciousness note, we should look into, and this I'm hoping there are influential people who have a chance. If you know what RWAPS means, so RWAPS is remunerative work outside of public service. That is the liberator. So RWAPS should actually be standardized for all employees as a means of empowerment, as long as we can maintain a culture of ethical principles with it. So we spoke a bit earlier about Ubuntu. Ubuntu always has two legs. The one leg is people, the other leg is ethics. We have many examples in our country of Ubuntu without ethics. You know, where it's all about, if you think of gangsterism, it's often Ubuntu without ethics. It's still the brotherhoods, but it's not on ethics. We know how destructive that becomes. I don't know if anybody wants to challenge me on this, but was this convincing enough? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's do the next one. I'm sorry it's so small. The extra mile trap. So I don't know if you're familiar with something called the PMDS system, the performance management, you know, the one where they rate you 1 out of 5. I think it's actually 1 out of 6, but 6 got reserved for Madiba, so you can't be 6. I've literally heard somebody say to me with the 6, is that, do you think you're better than Madiba? Yeah. So what generally happens, this was a system we did. I'm sure you've got your own variation of it. But the PMDS system is from 1 to 6. 3 is 100%. 4 to 5, you get your bonus. 6, as I said, has been reserved. And it incentives are given. Sorry. If you get a 4 or 5, you get a bonus, right? And so it's incentives that give the allure that you can gain a bonus due to extra efforts. An extra effort is defined as going over and beyond your expected duties, which deserves to be rewarded, okay? So that's the notion that they have. And it creates the illusion of, I'm just going to refer to my notes here. It creates the illusion of an economic incentive for an ethical act. Think about that. It gives the allure of an economic incentive for an ethical act. However, the economic incentive does not come close to remunerating the selfless act that was created in the first place. And this is something that I do in the sessions where we deal with this particular chain of mind. And I'll say, okay, let's say, for example, you're earning a salary of, let's say, 40,000 Rand a month. And you are going to get a, let's say, 10% bonus on that. Now, you don't get 10% of your year, you get 10% of a month, right? So 40,000 Rand, that gives you a 4,000 Rand bonus. Now, let's work out how many hours you would have to do in order to qualify for that. And generally, we're talking about at least 60 hours of outside work that you would have done in order to get that 4,000 Rand bonus. So now let's talk about 60 hours on 4,000 Rands. What is that? That's 60 Rand an hour. So if you're going to work 60 Rand an hour, you can probably make, let's say, 100 Rand an hour or 200 Rand an hour if you wait tables. Now, the bonus that you were after is paying you less than if you were to wait tables. So the question isn't, should you be upset or angry at the level of bonus at which you get, and should you be fighting for a bonus? The question is, why are you so terrible at engaging and negotiating the amount of money you make? And why are you selling your hours so cheap that you're willing to do a expertise leveled work for 60 Rand an hour? You see how the conversation then changes. Because then you recognize that your hours are precious to you. Because remember, if you're working overtime, where you're not spending your hours? With your family, with yourself, with fitness, with whatever it is that you enjoy to do. And that's where you're actually stealing your time and your effort for 60 Rand an hour. I just want to see from a show of hands, who here would work for 60 Rand an hour at a high level of expertise? And remember, that's for somebody who's earning at a 40,000 Rand mark. And the lower that goes, if it's 10,000 Rand, it just becomes ridiculous. We're working for like R1 an hour. And it's because we get sucked into this concept of bonuses and that we absolutely miss that chain of the mind. And it's such a derogatory thing. And then on top of that, we get told bonus is not a given, it's a privilege, which cheapens act of humanity into a drive for money. I didn't even care about the bonus when I did it. You told me that I might be able to apply for a bonus, and now you're cheapening me with money. And it cheapens recognition, because now if I'm the one who feels that I want to do something with a certain community or a certain thing that I need ahead of me, then my colleagues are going to go, oh, you're just doing that to get the bonus. So it cheapens me to being a psychopath. You see what, and then that never gets discussed. It's always discussed in the corridors. Oh, look at so-and-so, because we don't talk to each other. Look at so-and-so. They're just trying to suck up for a bonus. And then the last one. Everybody happy with that? Anybody want to contend? Okay, the third one is, you should be grateful for what you've got. How often do we hear that? Especially within our families and within our communities. At least you're not like so-and-so, you got a job, you got your promotion, just be happy with what you've got. And I'm quoting Biko here, being part of an exploitative society in which we are often the direct objects of exploitation. I don't think this has changed. I think sometimes in the work conditions that we are in, we have become the objects of exploitation. We need to evolve a strategy towards our economic situation. We are aware that the disempowered, our communities, are still colonized, even within the borders of South Africa. I know that this was written in apartheid days, but I think it's probably still even true. How did we miss that other colonization that happened around the mines, the uranium mines? Their cheap labor has helped to make South Africa what it is today. Our money from the townships takes a one-way journey to white shops and white banks, and all we do in our lives is pay the white man either with labor or in coin. I still today see on the highway in this freezing weather that some people find it acceptable to put human beings, brothers of theirs, in the back of their trucks, driving it's absolutely ridiculous. And those people are freezing, and it's okay, and it's just accepted, and nobody's upset about it. Or the other thing I remember when I was working in Umlazi, which is the biggest township in KwaZulu-Natal, and there were people who, the shopping center where you could buy your groceries from in Umlazi was a super spa. There's something very wrong about that. And the owner was not of the same skin color and culture as the people that were buying from his shop. On the other side, we have in Lansdowne a Woolworths. And that talks about something else happening, that now communities, people that were from communities, left the communities in search of Claremont and all the rest, realize those communities are boring as hell and are coming back into Athlone and Lansdowne, are starting to generate income within, to the point where Woolworths is willing to invest into Lansdowne. So there's something else happening there. But there's a question mark that we've got to ask about this. And this is coupled with the overt arrogancy of white racism have conspired against us. Thus, in South Africa now, it is very expensive to be poor, and I don't think that's changed either. It is the poor people who stay furthest from town, therefore have to spend more money on transport to come and work for white people. It's the poor people who use uneconomic and inconvenient fuel like paraffin and coal because of the refusal, well, we can almost put in the word municipalities of the white man to install electricity in black areas. So there's the poor people who are governed by many ill-defined restrictive laws and therefore have to spend money on fines for technical offenses. We saw that a lot in lockdown, how many taxi drivers had to pay fines for overloading people. But the flow of transport, although I know it's a risky thing to say, but the overflow of transport has never properly been addressed. And there's a problem there. It is the poor people who have no hospitals and therefore exposed to exorbitant charges by private doctors. Poor people who use untarred roads have to walk long distances, therefore experience the greatest wear and tear on commodities like shoes. Poor people who have to pay for their children's books, while others get them for free. It does not need to be said that black people are often poor. That comes from Biko 96 and 97. And this is another thing that he said, and I love this. Content is a part of the trap. Why should you not be grateful? You should always aspire for more. Why? Because content is a part of the trap. And aspirations, ambition, allows for innovation, especially if the ambition is internal, your ambition. When you're ambitious with somebody else's money and somebody else's time, that's another story. But I'm talking about ambition of your own time, of your own money. And innovation is part of the natural development of any culture. A culture is essentially society's composite answer to the varied problems of life. Isn't that a beautiful definition of culture? We get so stuck on the cultural thing, don't we? I think it's because of the need that we have to be able to hold on to our whatever it is that we've got, because it's not always very obvious. But I'm so happy that Biko wrote this because I can quote him on it with a bit more confidence. But a culture is essentially society's composite answer to the varied problems of life. We're experiencing new problems every day, and whatever we do adds to the richness of our cultural heritage, as long as it keeps the human being at the center. And that's also something to do, we can talk about our own cultures. It's important that cultures shift, but we can also talk about the culture of an organization. We can talk about the culture of public sectors. We can talk about the culture of a company. Those are cultures in themselves as well. And this is the important line that you can retort back next time you're told to be content and happy, is empowerment is wanting to change the poverty trap, not only being content to escape it. And that calls for especially what we like to call the privileged people. Privilege creates responsibility. We don't have the luxury of sitting back. We have to start to address these things because we are in a position to be able to talk and be heard. Well, I'm trying. Okay. And the problem here is it overspills. It has the potential to threaten the balance of the individual. I become a working person and think back about the middle managers that I was seeing. I'm depressed. I don't feel like I'm alive. I don't feel like I have a purpose. It has the potential to threaten me, but it also overspills into the work-home boundary line. It threatens the ego of the manager, which threatens the integrity of the manager, and incentives cuts into family ties. So you see, there's a lot of other things that are going on, which makes it difficult for us to just leave it at the workplace because it kind of starts to creep into identity. I hope I've got enough time just for a few more. Oh, they're going to leave. Okay, perfect. So this slide is about how does this thing that's happening at work start to mess me up when it starts to become personal. So you've seen this already. So what happens is this part over here and this part over here never talk to each other because this justifier over here stops them from doing so. You get paid however much money you agree on being abused in this way. That's literally the definition of a manager, right? So there's a chasm. Is that the right way of pronouncing it? English is my second language.
The teacher says yes.
Chasm. Okay. There's a chasm here that becomes internalized. So this chasm becomes internalized. Top is ego-driven, bottom is emotive-driven, or if you like, emotive is what allows us to know that we're okay and everybody else is okay. So that's the humanity. So when my ego and my emotions are not talking to each other, when they are talking to each other, so if management and the employees are talking to each other, then we have a stable and balanced core that is established. But once these two start to not talk to each other, then we have conflict. And if we have conflict, that's where a lot of the pathology takes place. And I was like, but this looks so familiar. Why does it look familiar to a psychologist? Because that's exactly how our bodies work. If I'm feeling tired, my body is communicating to me, I need to go and sleep. What do? We drink coffee. What is coffee? Coffee is not giving you energy. It's a chemical that you drink that tricks your brain into the same thing that you do when you yawn, which is tricks you into thinking that you're now in a waked up phase. It doesn't give you energy. It just tricks your brain into thinking that you're awake. That's why when you drink too much coffee, you're very, very tired at the end of the day because you're constantly tricking your body to use your reserve energy. Same with cigarettes. People who smoke, generally, if you haven't smoked for a while and then start smoking again, you realize that by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you're more tired than you were previously because you're tricking your brain into thinking so. So what you're doing is you're overriding your brain. Now, why are you doing that? Because I need to get this deadline in. I need to get this thing. This guy's phoning me. There's now WhatsApp happening. And especially post-COVID, the way that we are abusing people with WhatsApps and insistence is inhumane and disgusting. And in a body, when I'm constantly not listening to my body, and I do that for a long period of time, that's how you develop things like panic disorders, the more profound stuff. In its worst form, that becomes psychosis. Especially it lends yourself forward towards substance abuse and addiction because it takes some of the edge off. Have you ever heard that? I just needed to take the edge off. That's where pathology is developed. And I'm worried because I think to a very same extent, we might be living and working in working conditions that is actually developing pathology for us. I'm not going to go into those quotes. And within the South African context, we have a history of the struggle between disempowerment and agency. Because here's the other problem. There's nobody that you can actually complain to that's actually going to listen to you. But it's true. And the reason is because the system was designed like that. I mean, if you were sitting there as a parliamentarian for the National Party in the 70s, and you wanted to put through a law, and you knew that you were backing up the minority against the majority, what you don't say to the majority is no. What you say is yes, but you need a blue form with a red pen, with a black sticker, with a yellow. And every time that they come back with the form, you just say, you forgot this, or the stamp has the wrong dates. Go back to that person. So what you do, there's a beautiful portrayal of this in the movie, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they mock it. As a guy who's going to be executed, but if they just have everything in place and they make it in the end, but it's hell. And it's exactly that thing. It's not saying no, because if you say no, then you've got conflict. So you say yes with conditions. It's worse than saying no, because it takes away your opportunity to fight. And that's still in existence now, is that kind of thinking of bureaucracy. You get to the point and then it's this person is sick. And a structure should be able to say, if this person is sick, then that person takes over responsibility. No. We have to wait for that person to get well again. And then, because it's only that person, it's all BS. It's all nonsense. So we have a rooted vulnerability due to the previous. And the problem is we accept this because we know this. It's familiar to us. It's how society ran before. So we've been born into the system. if you don't believe me how much we've been born into the system, can I just ask, at birth, did anybody sign a document that said that they agreed to be living in a country where we have to every 4 years elect or 5 years elect a president? Did anybody sign that document on birth? Was anybody consulted on that membership? 5 years. So nobody signed that. I also didn't sign that document. So when we're told, this is the person that we've elected, now I'm going to be very controversial, but this is the guy that we've elected, you've got to have respect for your president. Did we agree to be living in that kind of society? Please do.
We adopted the Constitution.
We adopted.
The Constitution, our Parliament operates, our democracy will work.
Did you personally adopt the Constitution?
Developing the Constitution, and the Constitution was consulted in this country.
That is true.
We were given an opportunity for public participation. And I dare say that our Constitution is better than the American Constitution.
Absolutely.
You follow often what's happening with Trump at the moment, and you'll be shocked how supreme our Constitution is to their Constitution. So I support the Constitution, and supporting the Constitution, I support the issue of democracy and how our system of democracy works. Like in the States, any state can change their system of voting.
Yeah.
They've just brought in something now where parliamentarians will decide whether they accept the outcome of that state's election. So corrupt they are. So, with all the criticism of the country, if you
I see.
compare it,
Okay.
it's a good country for me because they have a good constitution.
Amen. Amen, sister. I see there was a hand next to you. I don't know if you want to do. Perfect. Perfect. Did you want to add? Okay. Yeah. I think I absolutely 1,000% agree with you that we can be very proud in this country about our constitution. And I think what makes our constitution so beautiful is the fact of the people who were there. Often the legacies of the people who came up with the constitution really shows how that constitution came to be. I remember there was the inaugural speech of Justice Albie Sachs referenced so much of the constitution towards a beautiful relationship that he and the others had with Oliver Tambo, and spoke about how Oliver Tambo's legacy and thinking was such a fervent place. And I think that has a lot to do also in regards to why our constitution is the way we are at. However, I am asking you, do you see what I'm saying to you? Or what I'm asking from you is, it's not about should we reject necessarily things like, for example, the constitution or democracy and so forth. But the point is that we've got to be a little bit careful about how sometimes we become disempowered, often in systems that feel like they've always been and always will remain. And it's so important for us to be able to find our voice and our agency there. And one of the difficulties with the structure of the society in which we're living in now is because of the, how would you say, the charisma, it's often the charisma of an individual that paths your way towards empowerment or towards power, that we often miss the individual voices that are so essential to hear from ground level, of which, let's be honest, what we're doing here, it just says how important these types of conversations are. Does it make, am I winning with you? That's maybe the best question I can ask. Not yet.
Because I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But it put myself with law,
Yes.
and I often use law and the Constitution
Yeah.
to win my battles of where I am
I've got you.
being not
Yeah.
equally treated or whatever.
Yeah.
And I familiarize myself with the Constitution.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I think that the way the Constitution is structured protects us in many
Absolutely.
ways than not.
Yeah.
And it is our responsibility to familiarize ourselves with the Constitution
Yeah. I've got you.
and claim those rights.
Amen. I've got like 2 minutes. Can I ask you to pause it for the Q&A? Is that okay? Okay. The thing is, and maybe we're witnessing it here, is often under immense pressure. You don't build leaders through times of peace. You build leaders through times of struggle. And one of the things that we have to our absolute pleasure from the 70s and the 80s is the great work of people like, for example, Sobukwe, people like Biko, Rick Turner, and then obviously the giants of Albie Sachs, Oliver Tambo. And there's something about that where how we fight against it, even if it's on our own level, is very important in regards to changing the culture and changing that through. And I agree in regards to the fact that at some point it's a political fight, or even if you like a legal fight. But what I also want to say to you, because that's the you I'm talking to now, is as you're working, as you're in your jobs, be careful a little bit about the power that might be taken away from you, from the structures which you feel that you have to do, because you have to sign the job description, you have to do the PMDS. And as a result of that, because that's one of the big things that COVID and lockdown really taught us, was that we're actually really able to be innovative, creative, and brilliant with the ideas that come through. There were so many brilliant ideas. Okay, some of them were, opening shebeens in your backyard, but people survived on the back of that. But there was also so many people who took the plunge and started making money on their own. I remember that in lockdown, the opportunities for home cooked meals in the area that I was working at became quadrupled. But it was more than that as well. It started that thing again around community, looking out for each other, the money generating within its own circles. And there was a real danger post-lockdown when we all went back into work that some of us would just carry on being allowed to work in the way that we were working, and especially around women empowerment. This was something I learned from a client, was the beauty of a hybrid approach meant that women could be at home and work, and the men started to get uncomfortable because the men wanted to wear their suits, or whatever the case might be. But it was such a liberating moment of not having to choose one identity or the other, but to be able to balance roles. It really did something beautiful in regards to that. And it's very ironic that the complainers of us moving out of hybrid back into, 8 to 5, sit at your desk is generally men. And I think to an extent, isn't that a beautiful thing that COVID's also given us, is the idea of working. People are not generally good at being micromanaged. Why are we micromanaging people? It takes responsibility completely away from individuals. Okay, I've now said my thing. So I hope that was good and that you got something from it. I think from my side, it's really about empowerment has to always be an internal process. And let's see the change that are ahead of us. I don't know if there's time for for a question. I know that there was one potential one back. Yes, one question from the front. Yeah. Oh, one question allowed. It could be anybody. Does anybody have a question? Looks good. Do you want to ask the question? Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel Den Hollander. There were some videos that I thought we'll be watching, but I'll send it to the people. There is some of Mr. Dan Hollander's work on Daily Maverick that you can have a look at. Quite a controversial writer like Dr. Carmel van der Kerk. And thank you for concluding the session on men, and for us to have a deeper understanding of men and where we are in society. And it's so important that we have these discussions to try and understand the psyche of men, and not just all call them narcissists, because this is the word that have been running around for the last few years. And we need to change that and not just call a person narcissist. And I had a few discussions with Mr. Den Hollander, and I actually understand the deeper psyche of men after listening to some of his work. Please look on, subscribe to his channel on YouTube. You'll find a lot of information pertaining to the psyche of men and why men react in a specific way. And it's not just when they sit in the maintenance courts that they are narcissists, and that idea that is running around. So thank you so much for the last two sessions that you've been with us. We really appreciated all your inputs and so forth. It's just a pity we couldn't show all of the other videos and things that you have, but hopefully we'll be able to listen to you on YouTube and hear the other talks that you have. Please read the June Daily Maverick case of his views on the youth. Stunning article, and you'll get some more insight into this young man and how he is trying to change the system or the way South Africa is moving, and some of the dangers that he already identify, and how he takes it back into history in where we are and the time bomb that we are sitting on in South Africa. Thought-provoking. I really enjoy your work, and please don't stop writing. I really enjoy that, and always giving your information freely to the different departments. I know the Department of Social Development contacted me. They are busy trying to coax you into coming to present something to them too. 26 August is our next date. 26th of August, we will have the women over here. Then we will be celebrating women. So we will have some lineup of speakers. I will not be speaking. I will, in honor, as well as Mr. Opperman will not be speaking. So in honor of women, there will only be a female cast speaking at the 26 August community dialogue. Our special director in the National Prosecuting Authority, Advocate Bonikari Gamvu, will be in attendance. She already confirmed her attendance. She will be here, as well as some excellent world-class female speakers that will be speaking at our event. Dr. Shana Kemp from the Department of Education will be here. She will be speaking. And I wanted to ask Daniel to get his promoter to also come and speak. So maybe we'll be able to get hold of her in order for her to then also contribute and then speak at our Women's Day dialogue. That's the 26th of August, Saturday, 26th August, that we will have our dialogue. And I already spoke to some people in here that will be part of the lineup. So hopefully they will then also then speak at the Women's Dialogue, the 26th of August. For the rest of the program for September, we will see whether we will have a program, but in September, we might have a national webinar where we will then be speaking. We will then be speaking with other colleagues as far as the maintenance process in South Africa, where I will get some of my other colleagues that will also be part of a national webinar. That is September, where we, all the 10 senior maintenance prosecutors in South Africa will then join up via video link and then facilitate a session on maintenance in South Africa. There will also be a speaker, Kim Stevens. She will be in attendance, and she will address us as one of the female speakers on that specific day. I've spoken to some people over here that already agreed that they will also be speaking. So I will put up the lineup, and it will be on Quicket next week. I will make sure that it is available. So please join us the 26th of August, and then we will make sure that we have our next community dialogue. The last community dialogue will be the 10th of December, Saturday, 10 December will be the last dialogue, then commemorating the 16 days of activism, where we will then conclude the 16 days of activism period in South Africa, and will then conclude all the maintenance work that we've done. Please look at the Lunch and Learn website. Mr. Opperman put a lot of effort in there. Everything is in there that you need in order to somehow navigate your way to the maintenance courts. So if you have some time, look at what is on the Lunch and Learn website, as well as on the divorce week that just finished yesterday, pertaining to the divorce settlements and all of those kind of things. Eugene, is there anything else that you want to add? Thank you so much for being in attendance so late in the afternoon, and have a safe journey back home.